It was good, you who was like God, back from my next Leviticus study. And based on personal requests, I'm going to be changing my style a little bit to where I summarize what's going on in the chapter as opposed to reading all the verses and then giving a summary after. So if any of y'all like the old style, let me know, because from now on I'm going to proofread the chapter and then give a basic summary with the references. So last time we read Leviticus 13 and Leviticus 14a. Now we're reading Leviticus 14b, which is a subjective distinction which I'm using to refer to verses 33 to 57. The second part of Leviticus 14 is about leprosy concerning houses, leprosy in houses. So the idea is, if you got a house, if you got a crib in ancient Israel, and you find green or reddish spots, then you would essentially get the attention of the priest, especially if the green or reddish spots appear to go deeper than the surface. Then you would call the priest, and the priest would shut down the house for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, the priest comes, because remember, a lot of things in the Bible, in the Old Testament, are in patterns of 7. A lot of things are counted in days of 7 and numericals of 7. So on the 7th day, the priest comes back, and if it looks like the disease has spread, then he basically takes out all of the bad stones and the bad foundation and throw them into an unclean place outside of the city. So the idea is, here's your house, it's diseased. The priest comes, takes note of it, shuts it out for 7 days. He comes back. If it's still there, he's going to take the corrupted material and put it to an unclean place. Now, if after this point your house is still diseased, your house still has leprosy, so to speak, as if like, oh, it didn't go away, it came back, it sprouted back up, then we've discovered that it's some kind of persistent leprous disease. In this case, the high priest will break down the house and take all the corrupted material and again put it to an unclean place outside of the city, outside of the dwelling. But if at this time the priest comes back and the disease hasn't spread, then everything is cool, and then the high priest will pronounce the house clean. There's various rules for the sacrifice for the cleanliness, which involves 2 birds, and you would kill one of the birds and then dip the live blood in the blood of the bird that was killed at sacrifice, and that would sort of be the ritual atonement for the purification process of a house after it was unclean and then finally deemed to be clean. So all that is to say, those are the basic regulations so that the people of Israel are made sure that they're clean. And the thing that we learn is that uncleanliness goes just beyond humans to objects. Even objects can be unclean. That's going to be important because that shows us the uncleanliness is more about house, like in a ceremonial sense, not a moral sense. We're going to get them more on Leviticus 15 because Leviticus 15 goes into the laws about bodily discharges. So it talks about how if a man has a discharge, he will be unclean until the evening. He should go wash himself and then he'll be unclean until the evening. And everything that he, sits on will be unclean. The bed he was on will also be unclean. And whoever touches the body of someone who is unclean because they just had a discharge will also be unclean until the evening. Now here's the thing, this also goes for sex because it goes specific into the emission of semen in verse 16. So it's not just a bodily discharge, which could refer to like nocturnal emission, but it's also when you're actually having sex with a woman, you're both are unclean. Both parties would be unclean until the evening. And then it goes into things that pertain only to women, which would be like their menstrual cycle, and how they would be unclean during the days of their menstrual period. You know what I'm saying? And then they would go and bathe themselves and be unclean until the evening. So what we see is there's a lot of patterns and there's a lot of repetitions that a lot of different situations have similar protocols and similar ways about how you go about it, whether it be from the ritual associated with restoring the uncleanness, the time window when you go from being unclean back to being clean, and the ritual after the fact to sort of reinforce your purity. Now, the verse I want to emphasize is verse 31, where God says, "Thus you shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst." Now we have to ask ourselves, what does all this uncleanness stuff mean? Because God is saying the Israelites need to make sure they get clean because they're in my presence. But what we've just learned from Leviticus 14 and 15 is that not only can objects become unclean from things like natural infections and things like that may occur, human beings can become unclean just from having sex. Or like a man having sex with his wife. Here's why I want to pause on that, because in the book of Genesis, God tells Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. So the very means for that to happen, that would need to happen for Adam and Eve to produce children, is and the hair is unclean when we get to this part of the law. You see what I'm saying? So what God commanded Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, by them coming together and having sex, that would be unclean, because the Torah says that when a man has sex with a woman, they're both unclean. And after that, they need to bathe and be unclean until the evening. Now, what this shows us is that uncleanness from the Torah isn't about right or wrong, but it's more about ceremonial understanding before God. See, God is so holy, God is so perfect, that even something that is totally good in the right context, right? Because God commanded Adam and Eve to bear children and multiply. Even that before God will make you unclean, because we're so human and God is so perfect that even though God set up life in this way that you need to release fluids to reproduce, doing so, you would have to go through very specific rituals so that God's presence will not be defiled. So that just goes to show the metric of how holy God is, that even these natural functions needed to be highly regulated. And it shows how human we are versus how holy and magnified God is. And I just want to hit that point home, because it's not like we're talking about people that are perverted. We're not talking about perverted. We're not talking about sin. We're talking about natural body functions that God approves in other scriptures would make the children of Israel unclean, which goes to show that uncleanness is more than just being morally unclean or being nasty. No, these are natural human functions, but God is so holy, man, that even that would be unclean until the evening. Now, it's also apparent that we are in a new covenant on the other side of the Messiah that he initiated with the house of Judah, and then we can see the Gentiles grafted in. So 2024, across the world, those in Christ are under a new covenant. We are no longer under this covenant that would have sort of encompassed the Old Testament law system, right? Because the Old Testament law is never taught against, but we're not under the Old Covenant, we're under the New Covenant. All of that is to say, I fully understand that, and it's such a blessing, Romans 11:22, to see both the great personal relationship that we can have with the Most High, especially because of what Christ did, but at the same time be able to see how severe and how holy God is. And passages like this are really a great lens to see how holy God is, where even normal things that he designed would make us unclean, just because it ultimately reflects how human we are and how not human, how holy and majestic and how great God is. It shows how great the Creator is versus the creation. You see what I'm saying? So I pray that can be a blessing. I pray y'all would find this enlightening. If y'all have any questions, please let me know. And I'll see y'all in the next video, all right? Peace.